Boker Tov. Today's daf is daf Kuf Yud Ches in Baba Basra. It's fine. Okay, I'll find it. I'll find it. Today's daf is daf Kuf Yud Ches in Baba Basra. We learned for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael and Asur Masar V'Shivya. Yesterday we learned about B'nai Slavchad that they got. Mishnah said they got 3 shares. Today we'll see they actually got a 4th share. They got 3 shares. What were the 3 shares? One was for their father, who died in the Midbar, but he left Mitzrayim, and his father was a Bechor of Chefer. We'll see that Slavchad was a great grandson of Menashe. Menashe, one of the, like the 12 tribes. Yosef was one of the 12 tribes, and he had 2 sons, Menashe and Ephraim. Menashe was the Bechor, and Menashe's great grandson was Slavchad. Okay, he had a son. We'll see the pasuk in Tanakh. His son was Machir ben Menashe, and then he had a son Gilad. He had a son Machir. He had a son Chefer, rather. We mentioned Machir. We had Menashe, Machir, then Gilad, then Chefer, then Slavchad. Slavchad was a great grandson. So Slavchad got his own share, and therefore the daughters took his share of Eretz Yisrael because he was in Yosef Mitzrayim, and he also got a share of Chefer because Slavchad was a son of Chefer, and Chefer was also Yosef Mitzrayim. So he took a share of Chefer, and because because Slavchad was a Bechor, he got a double share in Chefer's Yerusha. So Slavchad got a share of Chefer and a double share because he was a Bechor, and Slavchad got his own share. So those are 3 shares we mentioned, and we said our Mishnah goes with the Shita that Eretz Yisrael was divided up among those who left Mitzrayim, not among those who came into Eretz Yisrael, but among those who left Mitzrayim. And therefore, that's how the 3 shares work out. The Gemara then said, well, the one who holds that it was divided among the Boi Mitzrayim, Boi Haaretz, and Slavchad and Chefer were not among those who did come in. So how does that all work out? So it says, the ones who did come in, after all, Chefer did have other grandchildren. Chefer had other sons besides Slavchad, and either they or their children came into Eretz Yisrael. And once they came into Eretz Yisrael, they took shares, and then it was reverted back to Chefer, so to speak, and then divided among all his children, among who was Slavchad, and the B'nai Slavchad took his share. That's how it worked out. We had another Shita, and Shimon Elazar said that it was divided up among those who left Mitzrayim and both among those who came into Eretz Yisrael. So you can understand our Mishnah also in that vein. The Gemara then had a bunch of questions. Rav Papa asked Abaye that it makes more sense to say Yotze Mitzrayim than Boim La'aretz. Then the Sukkah make more sense. Why would it say L'Rav Tarba Ulamat Tamid if it's among those who came to Eretz Yisrael? Everybody came in, obviously they got it. What's the difference, more or less? Whoever came to Eretz Yisrael got it. So that's Taka Kasha. The other Kashas were were either more easily answerable. And the Gemara goes on. Today's Gemara is also going to continue to ask Kashas on the second Shita that it was divided among those who came into Eretz Yisrael. So the Brisa on Amid Beis, on Kuf Yud Zayin Amid Beis in yesterday's daf, it said there that again, right at the top of Kuf Yud Zayin Amid Beis, it's Haketzad. He took a share from Yosef Mitzrayim. So if you hold that they got a share, both of those who left Mitzrayim and those who came there, so each got a share for those reasons. Then it went on to say Yoshua and Kalev took the share of the Meraglim, that they forfeited the Meraglim, the 10 evil spies. They forfeited their share to Yoshua, and we'll see what the source of that is. Yoshua and Kalev. And there were also the mitlonim, the protesters who protested. They complained about the water. They complained about everything. So those people at Askorach, they didn't have any share themselves, but their children got the shares of their parents, of the mitlonim's parents, meaning their grandparents. They took their shares. Okay, so that's what the Gemara said yesterday. Now we're gonna look for the sources of those things. We're on Yud Ches Amid Beis, 8 lines down on the page. Meraglim Yoshua v'Kalev net l'chelkom. So he said the Meraglim who took their share, they forfeited their share because of their sin. and therefore Yeshua and Caleb took their share. How do we know this? Amar Ula Damar the pasuk Yeshua ben Nun, the Caleb ben Yefuna, these two tzaddikim, chayu min ha'anoshim aheim. They not only the first shot is not only we also know that they lived. They were both Yotzim Mitzrayim and they came into Eretz Yisrael. But these were like exceptions. Most of the Yotzim Mitzrayim did not come into Eretz Yisrael. So Yeshua ben Nun and Caleb ben Yefuna, they lived, they survived, so to speak, from among all the spies, from the 12 Meraglim who went to spy in Eretz Yisrael. They lived, they survived the other 10. What does that mean? They survived, they lived beyond the past the deaths of the other 10. We already have another pasuk. It says, "V'lo noser mehem ish kim Caleb ben Yefuna of Yeshua ben Nun." Pasuk when it talks about that the Meraglim were killed, it says the only ones remaining from them were Caleb and Yoshua. So we already know that they survived. So what does it mean? Chayu min anashim elamai chayu shechayu b'chalkam. They lived in the shares of the Meraglim, meaning that they inherited their shares. So that's a clear source of chayu that they survived, and not only did they survive, but they took the shares of the Meraglim. Mitlonin in Ba'adas Korach. Now the people who complained, the protesters and the congregation, the gathering of Korach, lo hayolam chelik bar. So the Mishnah just said, the Brisa said yesterday's daf that we just quoted that they didn't get a share in the land, but their children could inherit from the children's grandparents, and it was the parents of the Mitlonanim and the Adas Korach. They didn't have a share. It says Gemara Vatanya. We learned in another Brisa, the Meraglim and the Mitlonanim, Va'adas Korach and the Adas Korach, Yoshua called not to Chalkam. Not only did Yoshua and Caleb take the shares of the Meraglim, but they also took the shares of the many other people, the Mitlonanim and the Adas Korach, which was whatever, 200, there was 10 people among them. There were 10 people, but plus the families, it talks about 250, but that Adas Korach, that's how we know that a minyan is 10 people, because it says Ad Mosai La'ida Razos, which was 10 people. So we know that a minyan of people and Ada is 10 people. But in any case, the Mitlonanim were many more people, and the Adas Korach, Yeshua and Caleb took their shares. So the Brisa we had yesterday said that the Mitlonanim and the Adas Korach, they just didn't get their shares. Their children could inherit from their grandparents, but they didn't get any share themselves. Yeah, and this Brisa says Yeshua and Caleb took their shares in addition to the shares that Yeshua and Caleb took from the Meraglim. It says Lo Kasha. Presumably Yeshua and Caleb divided them up equally. It says Lo Kasha. Mar makish mislanim Meraglim, mar lo makish mislanim Meraglim. One juxtaposes Mitlonanim with the Meraglim. So if you say the Meraglim, their share was given over to Yeshua and Caleb, the Mitlonanim was as well. So we'll see the pasuk in a minute. Mitlonanim, there's a hekesh Mitlonanim Meraglim, and one doesn't hold of that hekesh. What pasuk are we speaking about? The Tanya, Avinu Meis Bamidbar, right? Avinu Meis Bamidbar. That's Lafchad. Now, the Rashbam, the Rashbam is going to explain all these verse, phrase by phrase. Avinu Meis Bamidbar. When they came to complain, they said, "Look, our father died in the Midbar." That's Lafchad. This is the quote is from Benos Lafchad. That's Lafchad. Meis Bamidbar. He died in the Midbar. What do we mean by the Midbar? Because it says Midbar. It's obvious that we obviously know we're talking about Slavchad because they're talking. It says the Benos Slavchad complained. They said about their father, but he just mentions because the other. And also it says it brings down that it says Meis Bamidbar. Rabbi Kiva Omer Nemerkan Midbar. Midbar. It says Bamidbar. Mamar Vatschafat. Abedram Lon Safed. Mirashamin. Now we know the Makosh. The pasuk talks about the Makoshesh Eitz and the one who cut down trees on Shabbos. He was being put to death. Who was that person? It says Bamidbar here. It says Bamidbar there. Teaches us that Slavchad was the Makoshesh Eitzim. We said no Slavchad. We'll see on tomorrow's daf were very fine people. They were Darshanim. They were Tzadikanios. But their father was a Mechal Shabbos B'Farhesia. He cut down the trees on Shabbos. How do we know? It doesn't say there, but it said Makoshesh Eitzim. Doesn't say who it was. But from this Xavier Shav we learn Meis Bamidbar. Bamidbar teaches us that he was the Makoshesh Eitzim Slavchad. What he mean to say, and he goes on to say, he died by his own sin. He wasn't part of the Das Korach, as we'll see, wasn't part of Korach and the Mitlonanim. He committed his own sin and he was killed for that. Avinu Meis Bamidbar, that's Slavchad. V'hu lo haya b'tocha Eida, he wasn't among this congregation. What is Eida? Zu Eidus Meraglim. That's the Eidus Meraglim, because it says, it says, so he wasn't in the congregation or the assembly of the Meraglim. That's what they complained. They said, listen, he wasn't part of the Meraglim. He died because he was killed because he committed his own sin, took responsibility for it. Hanoadim al Hashem, who were gathered against Hashem, and gathered together against him. Elam Islam, these were the protesters, the complainers, right? So it says, Avida Meisba Midbar, he wasn't among the Meraglim, and he wasn't among the Noadim al Hashem, the complainers. Ba'adas Korach, Adas Korach is clear, Kamashma, that's the congregation, the assembly of Korach. So he wasn't among the Meraglim, he wasn't among the Mitlonim, and he wasn't among the Adas Korach. So Mar Makish Mislan Meraglim. Okay, it says here in this pasuk Meraglim. Again, they just said the Ada refers to the Meraglim, and Hanoadim al Hashem, that's the Mislonim, the complainers. So there's a hekesh between Mitlonim and Meraglim. It says Mitlonim in the pasuk. Now, Hanoadim al Hashem doesn't really say the word Mitlonim. It says Behu lo haya b'tocha Ada hamitlonim, but the Ada is Meraglim, and Noadim is the Mitlonim. So there's a hekesh between the two. So if Yoshua and Kalev got the shares of the Meraglim, they also got the shares of Mitlonim. Umar lo makish Mitlonim Meraglim. The other shita, like our brisa that we had on yesterday's Saf and Kufiyat Zion Amit Beis, it doesn't hold the hekesh between Meraglim and Mitlonim, even though they're both referred to in the pasuk. By the way, you see here that hekesh can be, even though it didn't say beferish, right? It didn't say the word Meraglim in the pasuk, and I don't think it says the pasuk Mitlonim either. It says Avina Meisba Midbar. Didn't say the word Meraglim or Mitlonim, but we understand that Ada is Meraglim. The Hanoadim al Hashem is the Mitlonim, and the Tana of the Brisa mentioned over here in this Daf on Kuf Yechesem Beis holds of this hekesh. So just like Yeshua and Kalev got the share of the Meraglim, they also got the share of Mitlonim. Okay, and the other ones are my lo makish Mitlonim Meraglim. Why? Says Rashbam. Why does he makish? Lo chosh lehekesh keeping lo ksiv beivav. It doesn't say Betocha Ada v'Hanoadim. It doesn't attach the two like Vav Moshe Balin Rishon comparing the two. It just says he wasn't among the Ada, nor was he among the Noadim al Hashem, nor was he Midas Ba'adas Korach. So he wasn't among either one. I said before. The Adas Meraglim Ad Masai LaEda Hara Zos, in referring to the Meraglim, there it says later also. That was 10 Meraglim. That was 10. The Adas Korach was 250, right? 250 people. But Adas Meraglim, that clearly was 10 because you had 12 Meraglim. Subtract Yoshua and Kalev, who were not among the bad guys. Bad guys were only the 10. That's how we know that the Ada is 10 people. That's what you need for a minyan. In any case, back to our issue. So we have machlokas here, whether Yoshua and Kalev, like our Brisa said on Kufiyat Zayin Beis, only got the shares of the Meraglim, because they forfeited their shares, the 10 Meraglim. And according to this other Brisa, they got many more shares. They got the shares of the Meraglim, they got the shares of the Mitlonim, and they got the shares of the Adas Korach. Now Abaya, Republic is the one who keeps asking kashas to Abaya, mostly on the Shita who holds that Eretz Yisrael was divided up among those who came into Eretz Yisrael, not among those who left Mitzrayim. But here he has the kasha on this very union. If you say there's a hekesh, that Mitlonim and Raglim are juxtaposed, and just like Yeshua and Kalev got the shares of Raglim, they also got the shares of Mitlonim. Well, there were a lot of Mitlonim. It says by Ilono Moshe, what are we going to drink? I mean, a lot of Bnei Israel were complaining. So if that's the case, Ichba Yoshua v'Kalev, Yoshua and Kalev multiplied and got so many shares. The Yarsu, they inherited L'Kul Eretz Yisrael, all of Eretz Yisrael. They almost got everything. Now Rashbam says right away, right even where we are, L'Kul Eretz Yisrael, Lav Dafka Kula, doesn't mean they got all of Eretz Yisrael. L'Ruba, most of it. Everybody, there are a lot of people complaining they had nothing to drink. If you say you're not hekesh, whoever complained among the people of Bnei Israel, Okay, there were complainers or protesters in every shevet. Okay, so they forfeited their shares, and their children got their share. Their relatives got their shares. They didn't get any shares. But if you hold that Yoshua and Kalev got all the shares of Mitlonim, every shevet lost a lot of their. There were a lot of complainers, a lot of protesters. Every shevet lost their shares to Yoshua and Kalev. And we have a tradition. They didn't even get 1 out of 1,000, as they got a very small share. And the Yeshua and Kalev did not take most of Eretz Yisrael. So how do you resolve that? No, we're only talking about, when he says we're mitlonim, we're not talking about the people who complained about the water. Those complainers. With this price, when it says that Yeshua and Kalev got the shares of not only the Meraglim, but also the mitlonim, we're talking the mitlonim of the Adas Korach. So it's only mitlonim among the 250. So again, when the Brisa says, "Avina Meisva Midbar Zat Slavcha, Dulo Haya B'Toch Eidas Adas Meraglim, Hanoedam Hashem Edom Mitlonim Ba'adas Korach." So the Noedim goes together with Adas Korach. So he didn't mean that Yeshua and Kalev got most of Eretz Yisrael. It means that they got the shares of the Meraglim and they got the shares of the complainers among the Adas Korach. Again, another kasha. This continues with the discussion on yesterday's daf and on Amud Aleph of Kuf Yud Ches. Another kasha that Rav Papa had on the one who holds that they came into Eretz Yisrael, that they divided among those Eretz Yisrael. If you say that Eretz Yisrael was divided among those who left Mitzrayim, which would include Chefer and Slavchad, this makes sense with the pasuk. The pasuk in Yeshua says like this. The pasuk in Yeshua, in describing when Yeshua divided up the land, it says like this. Utzlavchad ben Chefer. It says here, the pasuk that he quotes is Vayiplu Chevle Chevle. The pasuk here is pasuk Dal. Before that, I'll just point out that it said that Bnei Menashe, who were left over, meaning they weren't such tzaddikim, the ones who stayed in Me'aver Yarden and the Eretz Gilad and Bashan. And it said that Menashe had 6 children: Aviezer, Chelek, Asriel, Shechem, Chefer, and Shmida. And Slavchad ben Chefer, ben Gilad, ben Nachum, Menashe. Again, like I said before, Slavchad was the great-great-grandson of Menashe. He only had the daughters, and explains how, reviews that they had approached Moshe, and they complained, and they got their share. So it says, Vayiplu, pasuk Hey in Perek Zayin says, Vayiplu Chavle Menashe Asara. And this is the pasuk that he quotes here in the Gemara. So Papa asked to buy, according to the one who said, yes, I'm sorry, it makes sense that the pasuk says, Vayiplu Chavle Menashe, the portions of Menashe fell Asara. There were 10 portions of Menashe when in Eretz Yisrael. Now we'll see, it doesn't mean there are only 10, but he's referring to 10, as we'll see how the 10 works out. He says, I'll tell you why it makes sense. Shisa the Shisa Batei Avos. Again, Menashe had these 6 children. Rashi, right before the lines get wide, Rashbam, right before the lines get right, also says, he quotes that pasuk, Bnei Menashe Menosar Mishpachos Lavi Ezer Bnei Chelek Asriel Bnei Shechem Bnei Chefer Bnei Shmida. These were the sons of Menashe ben Yosef. Okay, so he had these 6 sons. So I'll tell you how you talk about 10 portions. 6 portions to each of his 6 sons, but the 6 sons of Menashe. V'arba'ah, and he's referring to the 4 shares of Bnei Slavchad. Now, didn't we just say that in the Mishnah that there were 3 shares? They got the share of Slavchad and 2 shares of Chefer that Slavchad would have inherited. So here he says 4. Okay, so we'll see. We'll see how the 4 works out. And the Gemara is going to ask, what do you mean? The other sons, one of these children of Menashe, right? It says maybe Eliezer, meaning Machir was the son of Menashe, and Gilad was his son. And then it says Chefer. Chefer was one of the families, was one of the 6 families mentioned in this pasuk. But Chefer was the son of Gilad, wasn't directly a son of Menashe. He was the son of Chefer, and Slavchad was his son. But it says those were the six families who inherited from Menashe. These were the 6 families, plus the 4 that they got 6 portions, and plus 4 portions that Bnei Slavchad took. Sarah. Now again, it doesn't make quite sense because we only said so far that Slavchad had 3 shares. So how did he say 4? We'll get to that. But according to the one who says those who came into Eretz Yisrael, so therefore Slavchad had no share, right? Slavchad had no share on his own because he didn't come into Eretz Yisrael. Neither did Chefer. But what happened? Chefer's grandchildren, right? Either Chefer's other children, Slavchad's brothers, or Slavchad's brothers' children, right? All of those came into Eretz Yisrael. They got shares, and then they reverted back to Chefer. And then Chefer's would have been distributed among Chefer's sons. And that's the share that they got. That's the share that Slavchad got. But they wouldn't get 3 shares because Slavchad himself had no share. Remember, our Mishnah said that Slavchad he got a share of Slavchad. That's only if you hold that they came out of if he came that it was divided among those who left Mitzrayim. So Slavchad got a share. But if it's among those who came into Eretz Yisrael, Slavchad didn't get a share. Chefer didn't get a share. What happened? Chefer's grandchildren, or maybe some of his other sons who survived, came into Eretz Yisrael. Presumably it was mostly the grandchildren, came into Israel, they got a share. It went back to Chefer, and then it was distributed. So if that's the case, Elamandam Laboy Aretz, and the last of the narrow lines of the Gemara, Elamandam Aretz, Timnev is only 8 shares. Why? 6. Why? Shisa the Shisa Bate, 6 of the 6 families. Again, the 6 families mentioned. We said that 6 families were mentioned here. Asriel, Aviezer, Chelek, Asriel, Shechem, Chefer, and Shmida. Chefer was one of them. Chefer was one of the 6 families, but he was really a son of Gilad, who was a grandson of Menashe. Fine, but those are the 6 families. Those 6 families got their shares. Betrayed who? And the 2 shares of whom? What's the share who? Sekelk and Rashbam, and the third of the wide lines from Rashbam. Traded who? Shnei Chalakim Minechse Chefer. He got 2 shares of Chefer B'Torah's Chazar when it reverted back. Shenatul b'nei Chefer ish chelko. The sons of Chefer each got their share. Ba'aretz. O son shayu ba'aretz. O heimo b'nei Chefer, or their grandchildren could have le'eu t'chuaz. L'chzul kol nachsas l'morishalen. Went back to Chefer, the Hainu Chefer. Shayom Yosem Mitzrayim. Shayosem Mitzrayim. Right. The Einan Ella Shlucha. They were like. He's simply a messenger for them. They will inherit, right? They were simply the agents. In other words, the grandchildren of Chefer came into Eretz Yisrael. They inherited whatever they got based on how many came in there. Then it reverted back to Chefer, and then it was distributed among his children, among whom was Slavchad. So first, Slavchad would have gotten a share of Chefer and a double share because he was a Bechor. So there'd be 2 shares, not 3. In other words, the 3 only makes sense. The 3 only makes sense if you say it was divided up among those who left Mitzrayim. So Slavchad got a share, but Slavchad did not come into Eretz Yisrael, and he had no share, and he had no sons. Going on, Benimsa, he was Kol Banav, all his children, and all Kol Banav, right? Kol Banav and Beno Slavchad Yarshu Shnei Chalakim. They got 2 shares. Lefishu Bechor. And other brothers each got a share. They got the 2 shares of the father of the Chasam Chefer. Now, when the brothers of Slavchad died, and they died after Chefer died, come on, Yeshua Slavchad Osan Shebachaim. So they inherited. In other words, the Yeshua Achet Slavchad, they inherited. The ones who survived, when 2 brothers of Slavchad died, who got their shares? Their brothers, the Gambino Slavchad, and they also got a share because a daughter inherits like her father. In other words, if Slavchad, let's say, had 4 brothers, and 2 of them died after Chefer Slavchad died, who would get their inheritance? Right? Who would get their inheritance? Their children. But if she had no children, it would go to the father. The father was dead. It went down to the brothers, Slavchad among them. And since Slavchad was died, but he left daughters, the daughters would get their share. Makam Avian, Yahshua son Achim Amesim, the Zachu Bechelek Shahayu Lahem Lito Ben Asechefer. They got their share. Shechziru Lo Banav Shebo Lawrence V'Hu Chazav Harish Lahem. So in other words, the one who holds, as we'll see, the one who holds that there were 10. The pasuk says there were 10 shares. So it makes sense. How do you get 10? The Gemara is going to say that. The Gemara is going to ask you. There was only 6 of the 6 families. Plus the 3 that Slavchad got, how do you get 10? But first the Gemara asks, if you hold that that the shares were divided not among those who left Mitzrayim, but among those who came to Eretz Yisrael, there should only be 8, 6 of the families, and 2 that Bnei Tzlafchad got as shares of Chefer, not of Tzlafchad. They got it as the children of Tzlafchad, but they're inheriting Chefer's shares. What two shares of Chefer? 1 share as Tzlafchad was a son, and another share because he was a Bechor, so he gets a double share. They didn't get a share of Tzlafchad. According to the Shita, we're asking if it was only divided among those who came into Eretz Yisrael. He didn't come into Eretz Yisrael, and wasn't given among those who left Mitzrayim, but rather only those who came into Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, he had no share. He couldn't. It wasn't like if Tzlafchad would have come into Eretz Yisrael, so he could have said they got his share and it went back to Chefer, but he didn't come into Eretz Yisrael. He didn't have any sons who went in. In other words, it was, if you hold that it was divided among those who came into Eretz Yisrael, it was only divided among those over the age of 20, right? Either over the age of 20 or 20 to 60. It was among those who came into Eretz Yisrael, those boys, those men who came into Eretz Yisrael. Well, if you say that, well, Tzlafchad didn't have any sons, and he himself didn't come into Eretz Yisrael, so they got no shares for that. They only got shares from the other children, let's say the descendants of Chefer, who came into Eretz Yisrael, who went back to Chefer, and reverted back to Chefer, and Tzlafchad got 2 shares of Chefer, one as a Pashut, one as a Bechor. There's no shares there. So the point is that we're saying if you hold that they left, that it was divided among those who left Mitzrayim, fine, makes sense that there were 10 shares there, like the pasuk says. Back in the Gemara, who Davishisa Shisa, it was only 6. It was only Timna, it was only 8. The first of the wide lines in the Gemara. Davashisa Shisa, but there were 6 families. Betray did who? And those 2. Hatim, you only have 8. Says the Gemara, even if you hold that it was among those who left Mitzrayim that Eretz Yisrael was divided, there's only 9, as we said before. Why 9? 6 for the families and 3 those Tzlafchad. So there was only a total of 9, not 10. Remember, what do you have to say? They also got a share of an uncle. In other words, Bnei Tzlafchad, what do they get? As the Mishnah said, they got 3 shares. 1 for their father, who was Yotze Mitzrayim, and 2 for Chefer, who was Yotze Mitzrayim, and Tzlafchad was the Bechor of Chefer, so they got those 2. Then there was another uncle who died. Tzlafchad had a brother who died, and they shared in his Yerusha, meaning presumably another brother who died with no descendants, and the grandfather was dead. So the other brothers, whoever survived, in other words, Tzlafchad was dead, right? Tzlafchad was dead. But some of the other brothers were alive, and then they died. One of them died, so they got a share in that too. That's one of the share. Died without children, and therefore they got that share. Would have been a smaller share, presumably, not the same share that they had before, because there were other brothers dividing that up too. In other words, let's say Tzlafchad had other brothers, so they divided among all the brothers, so they got share. So so just like you say, you have to say, even if you say it was Yotze Mitzrayim, it's not 10, it's 9. The answer is, how do you get 10? There was another brother who died, another brother of Tzlafchad, and they got a share. So you could say even the one who holds that it was divided among those who came into Eretz Yisrael, and you only have 8, as we said before. So there were 2 brothers who died. The Tanya, the pasuk says back in Bamidbar discussing about Tzlafchad, Nasom Titain Lahem, certainly give them Zu Nachlas Avian, give them the share of Tzlafchad their father. Betoch Achei Avian, among the brothers of Zu Nachlas Avian, that's the Nachla of what? Of Chefer. Right? They get the Nachla Tzlafchad and the Nachla of Chefer. Va'avartas Nachlas Avian, and you will transmit the Nachla of their father, Zu Chelik Bechor, that's the Chelik of the Bechor that we'll talk about. They got the second share, that's 3. They also took a share of the father's brother, meaning Tzlafchad had a brother who died, Shenemar, Nason Titain, because it says, Nason Titain, you will certainly give, meaning add more. Double Lashon, there's an additional share there too. So that's fine if you say that there were 10 shares and it was among Yotze Mitzrayim. If you say that it was two brothers who died, two brothers of Slavka who died, and they got those 2 shares, if you say it was divided among those who came into Israel, so he says that's learned from the word, because it doesn't say nasauti lemes nachla, it says it's achuzas nachla. The extra word achuza tells me that they get that extra share. So there were 2 brothers who got this. So that's how they really wound up with four shares, not 3. They got a share of the brother, or possibly got a share of 2 brothers. If you know that they didn't get a share of Slavka because it was divided among those who came into Israel, so they got the 2 shares of Chefer and 2 shares of Chefer's son, another son or 2 sons who died, and they got those shares. Now, Rashbam says, take a look at Rashbam, where we left up before, halfway down the wide lines of Rashbam, Tishahav, Udzonyain, Shisa the Shisa about the Avos. The Tlasa did 2, Ashnim, those 3. Zachanami Treach Bahana Treachi Mesu Achere Mos Chefer Avim. These 2 brothers died after Chefer died, because don't forget, if they died before Chefer, it would have gone to Chefer. The grandfather, the father would have inherited them. They had no children, and it would, before going to the brothers, would have gone to Chefer. The Zachu Kodem Isasan B'nechse Chefer, and therefore, before they died, they got the shares of Chefer. Shechziru Lo Banav Shabo La'aretz. We're going with the Shita that it was divided among those who came into Eretz Yisrael, so there was no share of Slavcha. They got 2 shares of Chefer and 2 shares of the brothers. Gives an example. Let's say Chefer had 8 sons. 2 died in Midbar. They also died. 5 brothers came into Eretz Yisrael, and therefore, again, we're going with the assuming that it was divided among those who came to Eretz Yisrael. And they took 5 shares in Eretz Yisrael, because they were the monks who came in. Then they reverted back to Chefer, their father. Meis Chefer, when Chefer died, Yarshu Shmona Banav. So his 8 sons, he originally had 8 sons. His 8 sons inherited him. Slavka took 2 shares because he was a Kiyah Bechor. That's what we said. The B'no Slavka took this. The Zayin Acham, not Zayin Chalakim. And the other 7 brothers took 7 shares. Meis Slavka, since Slavka died, not B'nosav, so his children took, Slavka took his, the daughters took his share. Shnei Chalakim, Shalosh Yorish Minechse Chefer, Meisu Shnei Echav, below Banim. Then he explains it, right? And then 2 other brothers of Slavka, those would be sons of Chefer, died without children. Bo Chamisha Achen, 5 brothers, Ubno Slavka, because they took their share of the father, Mokum Slavka, Avim, V'yoshim, and they inherited them. Nimsu, Bono Slavka, Notlas, Arba Chalakim, they took 4 shares. Beis Chalakim Gdolim B'nechse Chefer, 2 large shares of the entire state of Chefer, right? The entire state would have been all the shares that they got that reverted back from Eretz Yisrael. Ubeis Chalakim Tanim, smaller shares, B'nechse Shnei Ach and Avim, because those were divided among the other brothers also. Umiu, Hamakshula, Misfirle, Trey Achi, Elachat. When we asked the Kasha, thought he understood there was 1 brother there. But there were 2 brothers, so therefore he explained it that way based on these psukim. That Rashbam goes on. Rashbam says achuz nachla 3 lines from the bottom of the page, or actually 4 or 5 lines from the bottom of the page. If you don't hold of that, if you don't hold of the 2 brothers, you wouldn't have 10. She doesn't want to darshan nasan titan like Rabbi Elazar said, telling you the double lashon. You can't make crooked blessed. It's for your late. Different lashon could have been. Nasan titan. The pasuk talks that way. Lashon b'nei it's sometimes a little bit verbose, but it doesn't. You don't have to darshan there. I gavna have looked at the Torah b'kedushin gavi hanek tanik of kamakomos is when the Torah uses the lashon of hanek tanik or nasan titan. Do you darshan it or do you say different Torah lashon b'nei adam? Okay. So back in the Gemara now, 2 lines from the bottom of the page. Okay, but Amalei Rapapal Abai. So that's how we come out with the 10. But here's the question. The pasuk in Yoshua that talks about, Slavka, okay, it says Slavka Benach, tells that he only had daughters, and we know they got the shares and all that. But it says the name, it says the pasuk we quoted before says Vayiplu Chavle Menashe Asar. There were 10 portions. And what do you mean by 10 portions? Rav Meir is like Shemei B'Yardei. Those they got 10 portions in Eretz Yisrael, besides the ones who took the Chatzi Shev Menashe, who took their shares in the land of Gilad and Bashan, which were like the Golan today, which were says Golan Babashan Menashe, right? that pasuk in Vaschanan says that's Golan Babashan. Golan was in the Bashan. Gilad is there also. Besides that, they took 10 shares. And what do we mean by the 10 shares? If you mean, we said there were 6 families: Aviezer, Chelek, Asriel, Shechem, Chefer, and Shmida. Rashi quote, Rashbam quotes them too. So those were 6. And then there were Belsach that also took 4 shares, as we said. So Amalei Papa Labai. What do you mean? There were only 10 then? I understand. There were other children also. These other 6, besides Chefer, and Chefer had other sons besides Slavcha, they got shares, right? And you have Asriel and Shechem and Shmida, all these other children who are descendants of Menashe. So why do you say they got 6? And then the 4 of Slavcha. If you're counting those Slavcha, what about the other shares that these other great-grandchildren had? So the Gemara said, Amalei Papa Labai, 2 lines from the bottom page. When the pasuk in Yoshua talks about 10, what are you counting? Each folim, if you're counting the children also, 2 pape. There were many children there. In other words, B'no Slavchad were one set of great-grandchildren of Menashe, right? They were the B'no Slavchad happened to be great-grandchildren of Menashe. So you said they got 4. So let's the other great-grandchildren or great-grandchildren. Why don't you say what they have? eBay self-discussion. If you're only talking about the families that survived, Aviezer, Chelek, Asriel, Shechem, Chefer, and Shmida. So there are only 6 of it. So where do you get these 10? Like you're mixing and matching. There were 6 basic families who descended from Menashe, and then you talk about Slavcha also had 4. What do you mean 4? You count about Slavcha. There were other great-grandchildren or great-grandchildren who took shares too. So why do you list 6 families and below Slavcha as if we're talking the total amount was 10? If you're talking about all the great-grandchildren, so list all of them. There were other great-grandchildren who took shares, either got via the shares of their great-great-grandfather who left Mitzrayim, like Chefer and Shechem and the other ones. So if you talk about they got those shares, so list those 2. And if you're talking about Batei Avos, only the families are left, so list only those families are left. List those. Why are you talking about those? In other words, the Batei Avos, those 6, fine. The Tzlafta were included in those. They got shares. So did other great-great-grandchildren. So again, if you're talking about all of the great-great-grandchildren list, there were many others. And if you're only talking about the basic 6 families, so say only 6. Among those 6, there were many others divided up. In other words, those 6 shares got divided up among many other great-grandchildren. So it's more Olam at the top of Kufiyat. That's Olam Batei Avos. You really only talk about those 6. We're talking about Batei Avos. You're right. There were many others, many other great-great-grandchildren. But the Chiddush is the B'no Slavcha not the Chelik B'chora. The reason we mention these 10 to say, it says these 6, it says why are you talking about these 6? You mentioned these 6. How do you get 10? But there were others also. The answer is he wants to emphasize took the chelik b'chor. That's the point over here. How did they get 4? They got the 2 shares. They got the share of their father, Tzlafchad, a share of Chefer, the grandfather. Again, if it's divided among those who left Mitzrayim, assuming that, and they got a second share of Chefer because their father was the Bechor. Besides the fact that they got an uncle's share, but there's no chiddush in that. There's no chiddush in that they got a share of Tzlafchad. There's no chiddush in they got a share of Chefer. Because Chefer was also Yotz Mitzrayim, and when he died, Tzlafchad would inherit them, and since Tzlafchad was dead, the daughters would inherit. No chiddush in that. No chiddush in the fact that they got a share of an uncle who died with no children, because Tzlafchad would have gotten that too. The chiddush is that they got the share of the Bechor. Alma. So you see from here, Eretz Yisrael Muchsak, you see that Eretz Yisrael was considered a Muchsak, meaning hold on to it. Why? Because as we learned before, that a Bechor only gets a share in what's extent at the time of death. And they didn't have Mitzrayim. When Tzlafchad died in the Midbar, they didn't have Eretz Yisrael yet. So how could they get a double share? How could Tzlafchad get a double share, which the Benos Tzlafchad would take? How could they get a double share if they didn't have it yet? Right? They didn't come into Eretz Yisrael. The Chiddush is that even though they didn't get it yet, they were considered muhsik in it already. Why is that? Because Hashem said, I'm giving it to you. Okay, so we'll pick it up from here tomorrow. We'll discuss this. We'll pick it up from here tomorrow, Mr. Hashem. Going back to this. And the Chiddush is, how do you know that, right? There are some who say, we'll see that the Chelik before was Metalplin, but this is the Chiddush that Eretz Yisrael is considered like it was already in their hands from the time they left Mitzrayim.
if an uncle died,
Yeah,
and it reverts back
to the father, and the father was dead.
to Faker.
Right, and then he was dead, so we go to his children.
Into the stuff of Faker, and it wouldn't be to the next.
So in a Hanami, it wouldn't be an extra share, but if we're talking about all the shares, then there would be hundreds of shares, not just 10. The answer is because he wanted to tell you how many Slafchad actually get. But no Slafchad, how many actually? There's no chiddush in the. I'll take it more. There's no chiddush in the. There's no chiddush in the 3 shares that are mentioned. There's no chiddush in the 3 shares: Slafchad, Chefer, and the uncle. The chiddush is in Bechor, but since we want to tell you about the Bechor, that they got a second share, so we mentioned all the ones that Slafchad got, but there were other ones too. In other words, there were other great-great-grandchildren also got a share of Chefer, right? Or of the brother of the uncle who died. No chiddush in that. He says.
Well, all I'm saying is it gets included.
Yeah, it would get included. It would get included, but that's also a share. It's a smaller share, but it was a share. They had other people also got those shares.
Yeah.
Other people got those shares. You're right. It's not just that it's included. It wasn't one big share. It was describing all the all the various parts of the share. Right. But the Bechor is also, he gets a double share. You get it one big thing. Okay, it's a double share. So here it's not a full double share. It's a smaller share, like Rashbam said, but it's a share nonetheless. Now, some of those shares also went to the other cousins of theirs, right? Other cousins of theirs. But we're talking about Slafchad because we want to emphasize the idea of the Bechor.